But first, let's bring in Sky News host Steve Price and Senior Fellow at the Menzies Research Centre, Nick Cater, to discuss these despicable protests. Steve Price, you're in Melbourne. People were trying to enjoy the grand final and they had to deal with this disgrace on the streets.
I barely recognise the Australia that I grew up in over the last weekend. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And we've got the AFP tonight releasing a statement saying that they're waiting for some complaints from the Victoria Police before they'll investigate. You've got to ask the question, what's the point of having these federal hate laws, which are in the hands then of the AFP to implement, if they're not going to use them? I mean, this is the state of Victoria, and these protests were just as bad in Sydney, but this is the state of Victoria that set the Victorian Police on a group of people protesting about being locked up for COVID and fired rubber bullets at them and dragged people along the street, arrested them, charged them, fined them, but they can't make one arrest after what happened at the weekend with people holding photographs of Nasrallah. I mean, seriously, what are the AFP doing? I mean, and look, an excellent opening to your show tonight, Sharri, and I could point out that
Steve.
While you were speaking, the Daily Telegraph has reported that at the Kingsgrove Mosque in Sydney, more than 1,000 people have crowded into the mosque. The streets out the front are overflowing with people. For what purpose? They're at a memorial service at one of 3 mosques in Sydney tonight for the death of that dreadful terrorist who's murdered thousands of people. How can that be?
Well said. Now, Nick Cater, we welcome the fact that the AFP and the New South Wales Police have tonight said that they're going to investigate, but we saw an investigation after the Opera House protest. We saw the police stand up and gaslight the Jewish community by claiming there was nothing offensive actually said. Nick Cater, do you have any faith the authorities will actually do their jobs and charge anyone?
I've got no faith whatsoever, I'm afraid. And I'm really sorry to have to say this, Sharri. No faith at all in the New South Wales Police and their ability to prosecute these people fairly. I think we saw on those days after October 7 last year that there is a 2-tier policing system. You're allowed to throw flares at police if you're protesting in favour of a terrorist state. But if you want to get out there, as some people did 2 years ago or 3 years ago against COVID, they'll send the police horses in against you. The police force, I'm afraid, has been captured by this woke ideology. They are too scared to take on certain sections of the community because they're Middle Eastern or they're ethnic groups of some kind or another, and they're not prepared to take them on. The law must be enforced, and we must really focus on ensuring that people who come to this country from now on are going to absorb our values and recognise our way of life and not be at war with our way of life, which I'm afraid is what we're seeing quite frighteningly on our streets right now.
Yeah, well, that's not going to happen under the Albanese government under Tony Burke. And the point that both of you make about how we have seen that police can be tough, unnecessarily so during the COVID pandemic, but we've seen what they can do. They haven't done it in the past year. And I'm going to come back to what's happening on the ground in Israel a bit later in the show. But now let's turn to Australian politics. News poll out today, and it showed that voters in New South Wales and Victoria are turning their backs on the Albanese government. The latest figures revealing that Labor's primary vote has fallen to 30% and 31% respectively. Middle-aged and ethnic voters are said to be those leaving Labor. Steve Price, what do these figures tell you about, and maybe about, how many seats it could cost Labor at the next election?
Well, what it tells you is the leadership of Anthony Albanese is in enormous trouble. I mean, he's not a leader. And what you've just been talking about at the start of this show just adds to the opinion of the Australian people that they've got a weak Prime Minister. So what the poll is showing, that is in particular in Queensland, New South Wales and in Western Australia, less so in the great socialist state of Victoria, but a little bit, that people aged between 50 and 64 in particular are turning against this government. I mean, Jim Chalmers can stand up there every day of the week if he wants and talks about how he's delivered 2 surpluses in a row. People are hurting. Cost of living is still the biggest issue And they see a government that is saying, oh, we'll pat ourselves on the back over a surplus, but what they're not doing is helping people with cost of living problems. And, you know, if you go through the seats, and I know we've done this on the program before, it's not hard to find that this election could be a very interesting result when you look at Newspoll. And Newspoll's only going to get worse while Anthony Albanese is in charge.
Yeah, look, there's potentially another 6 months or so, maybe 7 or 8 months until the election, Nick Cater. Do you think at the moment it's looking like there could be enough seats for Dutton to scrape through with a minority government, or do you think it's still looking like it's in Albanese's favour at the moment, which is what the polls are pointing to?
Well, I think you'd be talking about a minority Labor government on the present polls, so I don't see the coalition being able to win on those numbers, Sharri, although they'll win a fair few seats, a couple in Western Australia, probably a couple in New South Wales, will probably win Lions in Tasmania and so on, but there won't be enough to get them over the line. But it is, as you say, it's a snapshot, and we have to ask, well, what can Albanese do to turn this around by May or whenever he's going to call the election? It's very hard to see. The economy's not going his way. He's not coming up with anything which is really inspiring the Australian people. And the real leader in this country right this moment, as it has been really since The Voice, is Peter Dutton. And the measure of that is the extent to which, whenever Labor is out there, it spends most of its time responding to Peter Dutton, arguing about Peter Dutton.
Yeah,
and the number one rule of advertising, that's right, the number one rule of advertising when you and I were working on the Sunday Telegraph is you never mention your opposition. No, so, you know, they are clearly in trouble, and they don't have a response to Peter Dutton, and it's going to cause them all sorts of grief. Indeed.
What's probably the only hope of winning is trying to, you know, attack the man as they did with Scott Morrison. Very quickly before we go, Steve Price, I want to get your view about these plans to honour Daniel Andrews with a bronze statue in the CBD in Melbourne. Look, this is given to any premier who lasts 3,000 days in office, but it's expected to cost taxpayers more than $100,000. Do you think he deserves it, Steve? And what's the reaction from people you've spoken to?
It's a slap in the face to every Victorian. I was overseas when this story broke, and I just could not believe it. I mean, I got angry enough when Dan Andrews wanted to join my golf club, and I threatened to quit, and he never got let in. I think I'm going to have to threaten to leave Victoria if they build this bronze statue. I mean, I might have to return to Adelaide or come and live in Sydney. I don't know. But, I mean, the people of Victoria have every right to be absolutely bloody angry if this Jacinda Allen government spends 1 cent and pours 1 drop of bronze to make a statue of the bloke that locked the state up for the longest time of anywhere in the world. It would be an absolute disgrace. We laugh about it, but it's just appalling that that bloke would be poured in bronze anywhere. And I tell you what, they're just asking for trouble, because if a statue of him was erected, aside from the pigeons, there'd be plenty of other people throwing stuff at it.
Oh, good point. Good point. All right, Nick Cater, Steve Price, great to see you both.